"Son, you just spent your last dollar on yesterday's chickens." Everybody in the county laughed when 23-year-old Eli Wren emptied his account. Every cent left after burying his grandfather on 412 Cochin eggs nobody else would touch. The hatchery couldn't sell them. Farmers wouldn't haul them off for free. They grew too slow, ate too much, and took 6 months to reach a weight factory birds hit in 6 weeks. That boy's going to lose the land before first frost. And he might have one bad hatch and the bank takes 28 acres his family held for 3 generations. But Eli had noticed something the entire poultry industry had looked straight past. He never planned to sell those chickens by the pound. 10 years later, the same men who laughed were on a waiting list, paying whatever he asked. Before we get into it, if you've ever been written off by people who never bothered to look twice, subscribe and stay with us. This one goes somewhere. Now, let's go back to the spring. He was 23 and broke and about 3 days away from doing the dumbest thing anybody in that county had ever seen. The rain came in sideways across the hill country of southern Ohio that last week of March, and Eli Wren was on his knees on the porch, crying up a board that had gone soft 2 winters back. He was 23. The canvas coat he wore had belonged to his grandfather, and it still hung wide at the shoulders, the way a house hangs wide when only one person is left inside it. 28 acres around him. Paralleling off the railings, a barn leaning toward the pasture like it had finally gotten tired of standing up straight. Thomas Wren worked that ground 38 years and died in February in a hospital 35 minutes east. The land came to Eli, not to his mother. That surprised people, and it shouldn't have. Sarah Wren had left at 18 and built a life in Chicago that had nothing to do with feed sacks or frozen water lines. She came back for Christmas. She came back for the funeral. She never once came back for a summer. Eli had spent 7 of them here. Every June, his mother put him on a bus, and every August he came home smelling like pine shavings and diesel, hands rough in places a city kid's hands have no business being rough. By 19, he wasn't visiting anymore. He was living there. So when the lawyer read the will, nobody had to ask why. What Thomas left him came in 2 pieces: the land and what the land owed. A machinery loan with 3 years on it. A tax bill, a barn that had needed a new roofline since before Eli could drive, and one small life insurance policy, $9,800 and change. Every adult who spoke to him that month said the same thing about that money. Give it to the bank. Buy another year, then sell. He didn't argue with a single one of them. He let them finish, thanked them, and then went and did what he'd already decided. His grandfather had been exactly the same, and it had driven 3 generations half out of their minds. Thomas went quiet a long stretch. Eli thought he'd gone under. Then the old man's hand moved on the blanket and he said one thing: "Don't let them shame you into cheap, boy. Cheap is how they take everything." He didn't explain it. He didn't get the chance to. He fell asleep about 5 minutes later, and he never really came back up. 5 months later, Eli was still turning that sentence over, looking for the seam in it. He pulled the rotten board free. Underneath, the joist was solid. Somebody had built that porch to outlast the people standing on it. The first week of April, Eli drove into town for 2 reasons, and both went badly. At the bank, a man he'd never met slid one sheet of paper across the desk and let it sit there. A date circled in red ink. The 3rd of November, 7 months. Miss it. And the loan defaulted, and the land went with it. He was kind about it. He asked twice if Eli had anybody helping him out there. "No, sir. It's just me." He looked at Eli a second longer than he needed to, then went back to his screen. Eli folded the paper into his coat and thanked him for his time. That was the first thing. The second happened at Draper's Feed and Supply 40 minutes later, at the counter with a rebuilt water pump in his hands. The clerk behind the register was maybe 20. He looked at the work order. He looked at Eli. Then he looked past him toward the door, toward the lot, toward nobody at all. Somebody coming to sign for this? The question landed soft. There was nothing behind it. That was almost the worst part. It wasn't an insult. It was an assumption, and assumptions don't apologize. Eli set the pump on the counter and said the account was in his name. He spelled the last name out 1 letter at a time. The way you do when you've had to before." The clerk said, "No problem," and rang it up. 2 people that day had looked at him and seen the same thing. A boy holding somebody else's farm. He wasn't angry. Anger takes energy, and he was budgeting everything that spring. He just started keeping count. The Millstone hatchery sat on the far side of the county at the end of a gravel lane lined with sycamores somebody had planted expecting to see them grow. 36 years it had shipped chicks to small farms across 3 states. The day Eli drove up, it was nearly empty. Brooder's gone, feeder's gone. 2 men loading a hydraulic lift onto a flatbed. The sound of it carrying across the whole property because there was nothing left in those buildings to absorb it. Walter Combs met him in the doorway. 66, heavy through the shoulders, gray beard trimmed close under a seed company cap. His wife had died 3 winters back. His daughters had gone into nursing and logistics. He'd held on 9 years longer than the numbers said, and then one morning he stopped. Inside, at the back, one cooler unit was still running. Behind the glass sat 412 Cochin eggs, buff and cream, heavy in careful rows on cardboard trays. Walter explained it, and it didn't take long. Breeding flock was healthy. Sold the whole lot of them Monday. Nothing wrong with those eggs. He tapped the glass once with his knuckle and left his hand there. There's just nothing right about the breed anymore. Not to anybody buying. And that was the whole problem, laid flat. A commercial meat chicken hits market weight in 6 weeks. A Cochin takes 6 months and eats more the whole way. It puts weight into frame and feather instead of breast meat. And it walks around on legs so thickly feathered they look like a draft horse's. Beautiful bird. Terrible math. A livestock trucker came through the aisle behind them, moving fast, not stopping. Grandma's chickens. Nobody's paying for slow anymore. He said it to the room, not to anybody in it. He was out the side door before the sentence finished settling. Walter didn't respond. He'd heard it 9 times that week. Eli stood at the cooler glass a long moment. Then he asked one question, and it wasn't the one Walter expected. "If I walk out of here without them, what happens to them?" Walter looked down at the concrete. The answer took 3 seconds, and those 3 seconds ran longer than the rest of the afternoon. Burn pit, Thursday morning. Eli had $9,800 in his coat, and every person who loved him had told him exactly where it was supposed to go. He thought about his grandfather, who'd hauled dead incubators out of estate sales for 25 years, because he never believed a thing stopped being worth something just because the man holding it stopped seeing it. He counted it twice and handed most of it across. Walter wrote the receipt by hand. Then he went into the back office and came out with an old brass candling lamp. The kind you hold an egg against in the dark to see whether anything inside is happening. That was my father's. Won't do a thing a flashlight can't. He set it in the box on top of the trays and didn't look up while he said the rest. Take it anyway. He went back into the office and shut the door. And that was the last thing Walter Combs said to him for 5 years. By late afternoon, the eggs were riding in the bed of his truck under 2 moving blankets, and he was driving 15 under the limit on roads he could have taken at 60. News moves fast through farm country, and fastest along the shoulder of a 2-lane road. 2 trucks passed him going home. And at least one of those drivers knew a Millstone box when he saw it, because there is no other reason for a man to drive that carefully. By the county line, his phone was buzzing on the seat beside him. He put it on speaker and let his mother talk. "Tell me you didn't spend your grandfather's money on eggs." The truck rattled over the bridge joint. He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. "You're 23 years old, Eli. You don't owe a dead man 28 acres of debt. That's not a gift. That's a bill with a bow on it." Rain started up on the windshield again. He set the wipers to slow. "I grew up out there too. I know exactly what that place does to people. It takes everything you have and calls it a life." He waited until the bridge was behind him. Then he told her he'd call Sunday. And here's the thing about that call. Sarah Wren was not being cruel. She'd watched her own father put 4 decades into that ground and finish with a leaning barn and a loan. She wasn't trying to take the farm from her son. She was trying to take her son from the farm. He understood it. He just wasn't going to do it. Grant Hollis was 55, thick through the neck, gray beard cut square, running a broiler operation across the road on margins most people couldn't survive a month of. 20 years in meat birds had taught him to measure every decision in profit per pound. It made him blunt. It also made him right most of the time about most things. He was leaning on the fence when Eli carried the second tray toward the barn. 6 months for your birds to do what mine do in 6. You know that, right? Eli stopped where he was, the tray balanced against his chest, rain coming down on both of them. Every word was true. He couldn't find the part that wasn't, so he didn't answer. He carried the tray inside and came back out for the next one. He was never going to sell them by the pound. He just hadn't told anybody that yet. For 3 weeks, Eli Wren's whole world came down to a temperature gauge, a humidity tray, and the sound of his grandfather's incubators running. Thomas had collected them the way other men collect guns. 3 cabinet units, all older than Eli, all rebuilt at least once. He cleaned every one before loading a single egg. He split the eggs into batches, dated every tray, and started a green notebook, writing the first entry standing up with his coat still on. He slept in the tack room off the shed on a folding cot because he didn't trust the wiring, didn't trust the thermostat, and did not trust himself to stay out of that building 4 hours at a stretch. The hum of those machines became the sound the house made at night. What woke him on the 5th night was not a noise. It was the absence of one. Eli came up off that cot before he was fully awake, and he knew. The way you know when an engine changes pitch, that something in the room had stopped. He got the flashlight. He swung it across the cabinets. Unit 1. The fan was dead. Behind that panel sat 96 eggs, and the temperature inside a stalled incubator does not hold. It drops. Not fast enough to see, fast enough to matter. His hands shook so badly he dropped the screwdriver twice getting the panel open. And then, kneeling on that concrete at 2 in the morning, something came back to him whole. He was 12. Same building, same machine, his grandfather on one knee with a work light hooked on the frame, telling him the housing swells when the air gets damp. And when it swells, the belt walks off the pulley. You don't need a new fan, boy. You need a quarter turn on that screw. The belt had walked halfway off the pulley, exactly like the old man said it would. He seated it, took up the tension, and put his thumb on the switch. Come on. Come on. The fan made one dry knocking sound. Then it caught, and it started to turn. Warm air moved across the back of his hand. He sat with his back against that cabinet until the window went gray, listening to a sound he'd heard his whole childhood and never once paid attention to. Somewhere in those hours he worked something out and never said it to anybody. Determination is mostly just fear that's run out of anywhere else to go. Hatching does not happen the way people imagine it. There's no moment where the room fills. A few shells crack early, 3 or 4 hours apart, then nothing. Then a stretch of quiet so complete a man can talk himself into believing the whole thing failed. And then the room starts to tick, tapping first, dozens of small sounds from inside sealed shells, all slightly out of time with each other, then peeping. Then the dry rustle of wet chicks working free of the only thing that ever held them. Eli's job through all of it was to do nothing, hardest thing his grandfather ever taught him. You don't help. A chick that can't break its own shell usually can't survive the week behind it. And opening it early doesn't save anything. It just moves the loss somewhere you have to watch. He sat on an upturned bucket 2 days with his hands in his lap. When it was over, 29 chicks were alive out of 412. Some never developed. Some quit partway. A few were too weak to see morning. And Eli wrote each one down in ink, because a number you hide from yourself is a number you can't use. 2 weeks later, the count settled at 2014. And that is where the real trouble started. 214 Cochins eat like an army, and they were 4 months from being worth $1 to anybody. 3 brooder pens sorted by size, heat lamps, bedding checked twice a day because feathered feet hold water the way ordinary feet don't, and damp litter is how you lose a Cochin. All of it cost money he did not have. So he sold things. A hay wagon, a welder, the good chainsaw. The last week of June, he stood a long time in the equipment shed in front of his grandfather's tool chest. Faded red rollaway, 4 drawers. Thomas Wren had spent 35 years filling it. Sockets worn shiny, a level with the old man's initials burned into the frame with a soldering iron. A dealer out of Chillicothe offered $750 for the whole thing. He took it. He kept the level. He set it on the shelf above the incubators and never mentioned it to anybody. So that was the summer. A 23-year-old selling his dead grandfather's tools to buy feed for birds hatching out of his dead grandfather's incubators. And this is the part where everybody assumes the story turns. It doesn't. Not yet. The night Eli Wren came closest to quitting was still 6 weeks out, and nobody ever heard about it. At 6 weeks, a commercial meat bird is thick through the breast. You can see the money standing on it. At 6 weeks, Eli's Cochins were tall, gangly, half-feathered things on enormous fluffy legs, like they'd been assembled from two different animals. Grant Hollis came to the fence the second week of August. They eat like market birds and grow like somebody unplugged the clock. Eli looked at the 3 pens. There was nothing in that sentence to push back against, so he didn't. Grant nodded once, like that settled it, and walked back across the road. Eli made the call on a Wednesday. A live poultry buyer out of Portsmouth would take the whole lot as culls, 40 cents on the dollar of what they'd cost to raise, probably less. The man was pleasant about it. He could have a trailer there Saturday morning. Eli said Saturday was fine. He wrote it on the calendar over the sink, and then stood in that kitchen a long time looking at his own handwriting. It would have cleared September's feed bill. It would have made his mother cry with relief on the phone. Friday night, he backed the truck to the barn and started loading crates, 4 of them full, working in the dark with a headlamp, moving fast because he did not want to see the whole thing at once. And somewhere in the 4th crate, he broke. He set the bird on the tailgate. He put both hands flat on the metal. Then he turned around and started shouting at a building. What was I supposed to do with them? The pens went dead silent the way pens do. You left me a barn and a loan and a shed full of machines that barely run, and every man in this county is waiting around to watch me lose it. His voice cracked all the way open on the last word. He heard it happen, and that was somehow worse than everything else. You didn't tell me anything. Nobody answered. The shed was dark. Thomas Wren had been dead 5 months, and those fans were the only thing left in that building still running. Eli bent over with his hands on his knees and let it go through him. Then he went back and picked up the bird he'd set down, and it did not struggle. It settled against his chest with its feet tucked up under it, the way they did, the way they always had. It looked into the headlamp and did absolutely nothing about any of it. So he stood in the dark holding 7 pounds of an animal the whole world had priced as garbage, and it was the calmest living thing on that property. He put it back in the pen. Then he unloaded the other 3 crates, 1 bird at a time. It took until nearly 2 in the morning. He called the buyer at 7 and canceled. Nobody ever heard about that night. Not his mother, not Grant Hollis, not one buyer who ever drove up that lane. And Eli did not understand yet what he had been holding. The first week of September there was a hard frost overnight. The first one, the kind that silvers a pasture and burns off by 9. Eli came out at 6:30 with a feed bucket, and he stopped walking. There was a young rooster standing at the split rail fence, a light Cochin white body, a black hackle down the neck like a collar, tail carried high, and the legs feathered all the way to the toe, thick and shaggy. So from 20 feet away the bird looked like he was wearing boots. He was standing in the low sun with frost still on the ground behind him. And he didn't do what chickens do. He didn't rush the bucket. He didn't spook. He stood exactly where he was, side on, head up, dead still, like he understood he was being looked at and had decided he was fine with it. Eli set the bucket down without taking his eyes off him. Then he went back into the house for his grandfather's camera, an old digital body a decade out of date. Thomas had bought it to photograph equipment for insurance and never once figured out how to get the pictures off it. 9 frames. The 3rd one was the one. In that photograph, the bird did not look like livestock. He looked enormous against the weathered boards. He looked calm. He looked somehow historical, like a memory of a farm most people have never actually had. Eli named him that morning, standing in the wet grass, and the name stuck for reasons nobody could ever fully explain. Warden. Draper's Feed and Supply kept a corkboard by the door for handwritten notices. Hay, fence posts, used tractors, a litter of barn cats. Eli had the photograph printed at a drugstore for $3 and pinned it low, under an ad for round bales. Underneath it, one line in black marker: "Not sold by the pound, sold to be remembered." He didn't put a price on it. He put his phone number and nothing else, and he drove home and honestly did not think about it again for 4 days. The phone rang at 10 minutes past 6 in the morning. Eli almost let it go because he was carrying water, and his hands were full. Something about the hour made him set the bucket down. "That rooster on the board at Draper's, is he really that size, or did your camera lie to me?" Eli looked through the kitchen window. Warden was standing at the fence in the exact spot from 4 days earlier, as if he'd never left it. Camera made him smaller. There was a pause on the line, and then a laugh. The loud, delighted kind that tells you a man has already made up his mind about something. The caller was Owen Castell, 51, sundark, a gray mustache gone white at the edges. He'd grown pumpkins 14 miles north until he turned 35 acres into an October attraction. Hay rides, cider, and a fence where families lined up for pictures. He said one thing before they ever discussed money: "People forget what they bought off me. They don't forget what they saw." He said it like a man reciting scripture he'd written himself. Owen wanted 3 birds, and not for meat. He wanted them big enough to stop a family mid-step. And this was the part Eli had never once heard a buyer say. He wanted them calm. Calm enough that a 4-year-old could stand 2 feet away and nothing bad would happen. Eli went very still in that kitchen. 6 weeks earlier, he'd had a bird exactly like that against his chest in the dark, and he had not known what he was holding. Then he got stuck because he had no idea what to charge. Every price he'd ever learned started with weight. He stood there doing arithmetic with no formula under it. 6 months of feed, the bedding, the hours spent watching which birds spooked and which ones didn't. The number he finally said out loud was several times what a buyer would have paid him, and his stomach turned over while he was saying it. It felt like taking something. Owen said yes immediately. No negotiation, not 1 second of hesitation, and that frightened Eli more than a refusal would have. A man who says yes that fast is telling you the number was low. 2 days later, a green livestock trailer came up the lane. Owen walked the pen slow, and Eli watched the flock instead of the man, watching which birds held their ground with a stranger close. Owen took 2 hens and a young cockerel that never once shifted his weight. After the trailer pulled out, Eli stood at the gate with the envelope in his hand and looked at the empty space in the pen. It wasn't enough money to save anything, but for the first time since his grandfather died, he had sold an animal for more than it cost him to raise it. After that, it came in threes, the way things do. Marissa Doyle drove up from a town 2 counties over on a Tuesday. 37, freckled, a 4th-grade teacher who'd left the classroom to run a small educational farm. She didn't ask a single question at first. She asked to hold one. Eli caught a hen and set her in Marissa's arms, and the bird tucked her feet up and settled there like a bag of warm laundry. Marissa stopped talking for 6 full seconds. For a woman who talks for a living, that is a long time. "I've got 120 kids coming through in May. Not one of them has ever seen anything like this." She paid more for that pair than she'd budgeted for animals all year and said so on the way to the car, cheerfully, like it was somebody else's problem. Ruth Pemberton came the following week in a Buick she washed more often than she drove, and she came in the wrong shoes. 70, silver hair cut sharp at the jaw, ankle deep in April mud in a pair of loafers. She wanted 2 hens for the orchard behind her house. Eli tried to talk her out of it. He told her a grown Cochin hen goes 8-9 pounds, and lifting one out of a nest box every day is not nothing at 70. She listened to all of it. Then she reached over the rail and laid her hand flat on the back of the nearest hen, and the bird didn't move an inch. "Son, I waited 46 years for this. I married a man who wouldn't have animals near the house." She kept her hand right where it was. "I'm not in a hurry anymore. Seems only fair to keep something that isn't either." She wrote the check standing up against the fence post and asked him to carry them to the car. The third one never came at all. He wrote, Nathan Cole, 28, a breeder out of the eastern part of the state who'd lost most of a flock to a coop he hadn't latched. 3 pages, handwritten, every question numbered. He wanted fertile eggs, and he named the hen, the big dark one from the photograph on the corkboard. Eli read that page twice, then set the letter down. That hen was the most spectacular animal on the property. She was also quietly the worst mother he had. 2 hatches, both weak, both fading inside a week. He wrote back and said no. He offered eggs from a plainer hen 2 pens over and explained, in his own handwriting, exactly why. It was the first time in his life he turned down money he badly needed. Nathan Cole ordered from him every spring for 9 years. A teacher, a widow, and a breeder. Not one of them asked what the birds weighed. And somewhere in that same stretch, a man walked the pens 10 minutes, said the birds were real nice, and then said the other thing. Is the owner around? Eli wiped his hands on his jeans. He took his time about it. Then he stood up straight. You're talking to him. The man's face did something complicated for about half a second. Then he bought the pair, paid full price, and told 2 other people about the place that same week. Eli Wren paid the machinery loan on the 30th of October, 3 days ahead of the date circled in red ink. He didn't pay it off. He paid it current enough to hold the line, enough that nobody was taking 28 acres that year. He drove home and told nobody. By November, he had a better class of problem. More people wanted birds than he had birds, and he couldn't hatch faster without pushing hens harder than he'd pushed them. So he took a spiral notebook off the shelf and started putting names down in order. That was the waiting list. A $2 notebook on a nail by the door. Grant Hollis walked across the road on a Saturday in December. He didn't lean on the fence this time. He came all the way into the yard. Eli told him what he'd told the last 4 people. The list was closed until February, and February was full, and he could put a name down for spring. Grant looked out at the pens for a while. Then he took the pen off the nail, wrote his name on the notebook, and set it back exactly where he found it. He didn't explain himself. He got in his truck and he drove across the road. Eli stood there a minute after he left. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't cross it out either. The call came in on a Tuesday in the 2nd February, and the man on the other end was not calm. He'd bought a cockerel and 2 hens in the fall. Eli remembered the sale. That roost board snapped clean under him. He came down 9 feet onto a concrete pad. He's not putting weight on that leg, and he won't get up on his own. Eli closed his eyes and stood very still in his kitchen while the man finished. Nobody was at fault, which is the worst kind of problem there is. That roost was standard, built like every roost in America for a 6-pound bird. A grown Cochin cockerel goes 10. And he doesn't fly down off a perch. He drops all of it at once. Eli had sold that man a bird. He had not sold him the one thing that came with it. He drove 35 minutes that afternoon with a dog crate in the truck bed. He refunded the money in full in cash, standing in the driveway. He loaded the bird himself, splinted the leg at home, and kept him in a low pen 9 weeks until he could stand on it. That bird never bred. He lived out at the Wren place 5 more years doing nothing productive whatsoever, and Eli kept him anyway. The story reached Draper's corkboard inside 3 days, in the shortest possible version. Grant Hollis put it the way Grant Hollis put everything. Now he's selling birds that break the coop they're standing in. He wasn't wrong. That was the problem with Grant. He was almost never wrong. He was just never looking at the whole thing. Eli didn't argue, and he didn't call anybody. He sat at his grandfather's kitchen table most of one night with a legal pad. And by morning, he'd found the thing that actually changed his business. He wasn't in the chicken business. He was in the nobody told me business. Every customer he had was going home to housing built for a different animal, and he'd been letting them find that out the hard way. That stopped. His mother called that Thursday. He answered braced. He was 25 by then, with a whole argument loaded because 3 people had already brought up the roost, and he assumed she'd heard too. She didn't mention it. Have you eaten today? He stood in the doorway of the incubator shed with the phone against his ear and could not think of a single thing to say. Eli, it's 4 in the afternoon. Have you eaten anything today? He said he'd had coffee. She made a sound she had been making at him since he was 5 years old. They talked 17 minutes, and not 1 second of it was about the land or the loan or whether he should sell. She told him about a neighbor's kitchen. He told her about a hen that had learned to work a latch. Before she hung up, she said one more thing fast. The way people say things they've decided not to make a production of. Your grandfather went 9 weeks once without telling a soul something had gone wrong. Don't be him about all of it. Just the good parts. Then she was gone, and Eli stood in that doorway a while with the phone still in his hand. The gate at the bottom of the pasture lane had hung on the same post since before Eli was born. That March, taking it down to replace the post, he flipped the frame over on the sawhorses and found something burned into the underside of the bottom rail. A name, S. Merritt, and a year, 19. He asked 3 people. The third one knew. Silas Merritt was 52, tall and spare, a reddish beard cut close. 2 fingers on his right hand that hadn't bent right since a table saw got them in his 20s. That injury made him slow. It also made him the most careful carpenter in the county, because he'd already paid full price once for hurrying. He came out on a Saturday and did something Eli did not expect. He didn't measure anything. He didn't draw anything. He stood at the pen rail with his hands in his pockets and watched those birds move for 15 solid minutes. He watched a hen try a standard nest box and give up. He watched a cockerel refuse a ramp twice, then take it at an angle. He watched where they chose to sleep. Your granddaddy paid me in eggs one winter. 93, maybe 94. I still owe that man a hinge. He said it without turning around, eyes still on a bird working its way up the ramp. What Silas built over the next 4 months looked like nothing special, and that was exactly the point. Roosts 1.5 feet off the ground, so a heavy bird steps down instead of falling. Ramps wide enough for feathered feet. Doors a Cochin could walk through without dragging feather along the frame. The first one was ugly. Eli said so out loud. Silas looked at it, agreed, and said the birds hadn't complained. Customers started asking who built it before it was finished. There was a Saturday in the 5th year that people in that county still bring up. A buyer had driven 2 hours with cash in an envelope. He wanted one specific dark cockerel from a photo. An enormous bird, black and silver, honestly the best looking animal in the pen. Eli had been watching that bird all spring. There was something faintly wrong in the left hock. Not lameness, just a hitch. 1 step in 12, and you had to want to see it. He walked out into the pen in front of a man holding money, caught that rooster, and carried him to the grow-out group. Table bird. Not for breeding, not for sale, not for any price. Then he came back and offered the man 2 hens instead. Every buyer went home with 1 printed page, and the first line never changed. Cochins are not the right chicken for every farm. Under it, in plain language, they're slow, they eat more, and they will break housing built for anything else. Some people read that page and changed their minds, standing in the driveway. Eli let every one of them go without an argument. The ones who stayed trusted him more than they had 10 minutes earlier, because he just handed them every reason not to. Owen Castell came back the 4th time in the 5th September, and he brought a number with him. He'd started with 3 birds. He was up to 12, and that photography fence was on his billboard now. He'd put signs up, 3 of them hand-painted, pointing toward the breeding pens, the workshop shed, and a farm store that had been a grain room a year and a half earlier. At the gate, Owen took a folded sheet of paper out of his jacket and flattened it on the top rail. 40 birds a year. Every year. I've got 3 operations down my road that want what I've got, and I'll move every one of them for you. He turned the paper around so Eli could read it right side up. It was more money on 1 sheet of paper than the farm had made in its 2 best years put together. Eli looked at it a long time. He was thinking about hens, about how many hatches you push through a flock that size, and what the 3rd one looks like by August. I can't do 40. Owen laughed because he assumed it was the opening of a negotiation. Owen, I'm not haggling. I can do 15, and I can do 15, and I can do them right. The laugh went out of it. Owen looked at the pens for a while, then folded the paper back up along the same crease and put it in his pocket. 15. He didn't say it warmly. He said it the way men say things they're going to think about for a week. That was the 4th wholesale offer Eli Wren turned down. It wasn't the last. It was never once easy. And every time the arithmetic said he was an idiot. Because here's the honest answer to the question everybody asks about this place. Nothing saved that farm. No single thing did. Not the eggs, not the chicks, not the workshops for 10 people at a time for almost nothing. Not Silas's coops. Not the feed. Not one of them could have carried it alone. Together they covered the feed, then the operating costs, then the loan. And in the 6th year, the roof. 10 years after Eli Wren carried 412 eggs into his grandfather's incubators, the place no longer looked like somewhere waiting to disappear. New roof, the barn standing square, and a gravel lot near the road where people parked because visitors were now a category of person who came there. He was 33, with one full-time employee. June Ostrander, 24, round glasses, and an unreasonable talent for spotting a sick bird 2 days before it showed. Buyers drove in from 4 states, and the flock stayed the size it had been for 6 years. He'd learned something in his 20s that most people never learn at all. Growth and success are not the same word, and confusing them is how you lose the thing you built. On a Saturday in October, there were maybe 25 people at the photography fence. The bird they were all pointed at was a light Cochin cockerel, white body, black hackle, black tail carried high, and those enormous feathered legs coming down over his feet like boots. He stood side-on in the low sun and let them look. Eli called him Warden. So had his father. So had the one before that. 3 generations of that line had carried it. By then it had stopped being a name for an animal and become a name for a shape. The thing he saw at a fence rail one frozen morning when he was broke and 23. There was a woman at the rail that afternoon in a good coat, holding her phone sideways, trying to get the whole bird in frame. Sarah Wren had driven up from Chicago that morning. She did it 3 or 4 times a year now. She'd never apologized for that call in the truck, and he'd never asked her to. She just started showing up somewhere around the 5th year, and neither of them ever put words to it. She got her shot. She showed it to the woman beside her, who had no idea she was the owner's mother, and she let that stand. A gray sedan came up the lane late that afternoon and parked crooked. Walter Combs was 76, thinner, using a cane, beard gone fully white. But there was still something of the hatchery man in how he stood. They hadn't seen each other in 5 years. He didn't go looking for Eli. He went straight to the fence, stood at the back of the crowd, and watched people photograph a chicken for almost 10 minutes without a word. Eli came and stood beside him. Neither of them started. 36 years, I asked one question about these birds. How fast can they grow? He turned his cane a quarter turn in the gravel and left it there. Turned out that was the wrong question. Eli kept his eyes on the bird. I asked a different one. How long is somebody going to remember them? Walter made a sound that was almost a laugh, except it had something else underneath it, so the market was wrong. A kid at the rail shrieked with delight because Warden had taken 2 steps toward her, and both men waited for it to pass. No, sir. The market wasn't wrong. Eli watched the crowd shift and reform around the fence. It was just looking through a keyhole, and that was the truth of it, all the way down. The commercial men had never been wrong about a single number. A Cochin cannot beat a meat bird on speed or feed or efficiency. Eli never disproved that. He never tried. He just stopped entering a competition the bird was never built to win. The value had been somewhere else the whole time. In size and calm and bloodline. And the face a 7-year-old makes standing next to something enormous that doesn't run from her. There's a piece of painted board screwed to the wall of the incubator room. Thomas Wren used it for repair notes, part numbers, belt sizes, the date he last rebuilt Unit 2. Across the top, in his own handwriting, Eli had written one line the spring he was 23. 412 eggs, bought on the last day of the liquidation. Years later, he added a second line underneath it, and he never explained that one to anybody either. They never failed. They were just sold in the wrong market. That farm never became a company, no chain of stores. Nobody ships chicks by the tens of thousands out of that place. But the loan is gone. The house is repaired. And all 28 acres are still in the family. Maybe somebody has been measuring you with the wrong ruler. Too slow, too young, too late. Sometimes what looks like failure is just the wrong buyer standing in front of you. God doesn't always set the treasure down where the crowd is looking. If this one reached you, send it to somebody who needs it today. And if you want more stories like Eli's, subscribe. Then tell us down in the comments. What's the one thing about you that people keep measuring the wrong way? Thank you for being here.